Well, to kind of bring us up to speed, like I said, this is the culmination of the book of Ruth. And last week we saw that Ruth obediently follows the instructions of her mother-in-law Naomi to go and to present herself to Boaz. And Boaz finds himself in a situation where he's flattered by that. He certainly wants to be able to redeem Ruth, but because he's a godly man and he likes doing things the right way, he informs Ruth that there is another kinsman redeemer, another family member that is closer to her than Boaz is. And so the right thing to do would be to give this individual the first opportunity to redeem Naomi and Ruth. And so he goes, or she returns back to Naomi. She explains to Naomi everything that has happened. And now there's a big question. Is Naomi or Ruth is going to be married to somebody, but it's just a matter of who. We don't know if it's going to be Boaz. That's who we want it to be. But it could be this other no-name person. We'll call him Fred for the sake of having a name. And so they just got to wait. Like I said, at the end of the day, Ruth knows she's going to belong to somebody, but whether it's going to be Boaz or Fred, we don't know. And so it begins in verse 1. It says, "Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and he sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, 'Come over here, my friend, and sit down.' And so he went over and he sat down. And Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, 'Sit here.' And they did so. And so it was common practice that because the way cities were structured in ancient times, there were walls around the city, and the city contained within the walls, everything was very close together. And so the main gate sort of became what we would consider to be the town hall. That's where everybody came to do business and to address legal issues. And so he knows that Fred is going to at some point come through this gate, and then he could call him over, which he does. And then they assemble 10 elders, and the elders are going to serve as these arbiters. They're going to be the ones who kind of sit in judgment and witness what is about to take place. And so Boaz wants to make sure that this, what he promised Ruth, that this issue of redemption is going to be handled today, and so there'll be no more question. And so it continues in verse 3. It says, "Then he, Boaz, said to the guardian redeemer, Fred, 'Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I'm the next in line.' 'I will redeem it,' Fred said. And so again, in this culture, it's important to maintain the integrity of family lines and tribes and clans. And so these people belong to the tribe of Judah, and Elimelech is like the family leader, the patriarch of a family within that tribe. Now, because Elimelech had died and his sons had died, this land is just out there, and there's no way for Naomi to regain it. You have to keep in mind that 10 years earlier, Elimelech leaves the house of bread, Bethlehem. He leaves everything behind, all his possessions, and he goes to the place he thinks is going to be more profitable in Moab. And so while he's gone, somebody else probably acquired the land, were farming the land, and were using it for their own benefit. Now that Naomi is back in town, she has nothing. She has no rights as a woman to anything based on her own merits. And so it is only based upon the laws of levirate marriage that someone could go and reappropriate that land or purchase that land back and give it to the descendants of Elimelech, Naomi and the subsequent heirs. And so we know that there are no males within the immediate family who could do that. And so Boaz wants to try to settle this on behalf of Naomi and Ruth. But I want you to notice that when Boaz presents the opportunity to Fred, um, he is concerned about Naomi's well-being, but I think his first interest is the priority to marry Ruth. But he doesn't even mention Ruth when he presents this opportunity to the other man who's next in line. So for the one who had the right to redeem Naomi, Fred in this case, this is a great deal. Naomi is old. She's not going to have any new kids. She's probably not going to live a whole long time. So this person can redeem her. He gets all the resources. He gets all the land. And when Naomi passes on, it belongs to him. He doesn't have to worry about having children or Naomi having a children and then giving those resources to those kids. And so it's a no-brainer for Fred to redeem Naomi and her possessions when you compare that with the opportunity of having to take on a younger wife and kids and that sort of thing. And so then Boaz says, after the Redeemer says, hey, that's a good deal, I'll take her. It says, on the day that you buy this land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite and the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with this property. At this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it for yourself. I can't do it. And so Boaz drops a bomb on this kinsman redeemer. He's all excited because he's going to get all these resources without much outlay for having to take care of Naomi. And then Boaz says, but wait a minute, there's more. Along with Naomi, you get her daughter-in-law, who happens to be a Moabite, and you're going to have to marry her and have kids with her. And those kids are going to get everything, including your name. The name is not going to be his. It's going to be kept in the line of Elimelech. And so the man says, well, no, I can't do that because then that is going to jeopardize all my current resources. That's going to jeopardize whether my kids get everything that I want them to get. And so Boaz is in a position where now he can, in fact, do what he wanted to do originally. It was to marry Ruth. With that comes Naomi, all the possessions, as well as Ruth. And that's ultimately what he wants to do. And so it continues in verse 7. He says, now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and he gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. And so the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, you buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. So this is a bit of a strange custom. When you had an agreement, they're all at that main gate, the gate leading into the village, and all the elders are there witnessing this. And Boaz and Fred come to an agreement. Fred gives up his right to redeem Naomi and Ruth and everything that comes with that. And so instead of doing what we used to do, an honorable agreement would include a handshake, and your agreement was based on that. They took off a sandal and gave it to the other person. That was their way of sealing the deal, if you will. Now, all those 10 elders are there to observe that. And so down the road, if there's any question about the stipulations to this agreement, those elders would have the responsibility of saying, "Hey, no, we were there. We saw what took place. Fred gave up his right to redemption, and he forfeited that to Boaz. Boaz agreed to do it, and they sealed the deal." So that's what takes place there. We don't operate that way. We now require lawyers and lots of paperwork and all kinds of other things. It continues in verse 9. It says, "Then Boaz announced to the elders and to all the people, 'Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired the Ruth, the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are my witnesses.'" And again, so keep in mind, it's important that they maintain this line. Had this not happened, there would have been a break in the lineage in order to get to Christ. But look at how Ruth is referred to in chapter 1. We began the story. She's identified as a Moabitess, and a Moabite person was the enemy of Israel. They were pagan. Their culture was just horrendous in the way that they lived. By the time you get to chapter 2, she's referred to as a foreigner and as a slave. When you get to chapter 3, she is referred to as a servant, and then now when you get to chapter 4, she's referred to as Boaz's wife. And so she's gone through this complete transformation process in these 4 chapters of being completely outside the family of God to being a duly accepted and legitimized member of the family of God. Verse 11, it says, "Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah.'" Now, you got to imagine this scene here. By now, there's this crowd of people. You've got Fred, and you've got Boaz, you've got the elders, and you've got other stragglers who've kind of come in. They've heard that Boaz is the kinsman redeemer that has gained the right to redeem Naomi and Ruth and all that goes with that. Everybody's excited. They've been talking about Ruth and Boaz, and so now it's come to pass. And they pray this extraordinary prayer over Ruth, that she would be blessed just as blessed and Leah. These are the 2 women responsible for the 10 tribes of Israel. And so they're saying that just as the lineage of Jacob, Jacob's line has expanded, we want you, Boaz, and you, Ruth, to be just as profitable in terms of your family line. And there's this reference to Perez, and we can't spend a lot of time there. If you want to read about it, you can go to Genesis chapter 38. But there's a similar situation with another pagan woman that ends up in this line that leads to Christ. And Tamar is married. She's a Canaanite woman, so she's a pagan, just like Ruth. She is married to one of the sons of Judah. His name is Now, dies, and there are 2 brothers, Onan and Selah, who have the opportunity to redeem Tamar, but they refuse to do it. So Tamar ultimately tricks her father-in-law into getting her pregnant. She has twins, Zerah and Perez, and Perez is the one who is born first, and so he is the one who continues on in that family line. And so you have a similar situation. Verse 13, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. And the women said to Naomi, 'Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he, meaning the baby, become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter in law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. And so it's interesting here that the narrator here telling the story, he says that Naomi, praise to the Lord, on this day has a guardian redeemer herself. Now, it's not a guardian redeemer in the sense of where Boaz is going to marry Ruth, but he's a guardian redeemer. He's the baby, the product of Boaz and Ruth that is going to enable her family line, her husband's line, Elimelech's line, to continue on long after she's passed on. That was a huge deal back then. And then they say to this woman Naomi, who has everything, and then leaves and loses everything, comes back and she says, "Look, I'm bitter. Don't call me pleasant anymore. I'm bitter that the Lord has dealt with me severely." And they're saying to her, "Wow, you are so blessed that you have everything." And they use this phrase, "You who have a daughter-in-law who's better to you than 7 sons." And so 7 is that number of completeness or perfection. And what they're saying is your situation as it relates to having your husband and your sons die, but your daughter-in-law being Ruth, who was willing to give up everything for you and take care of you, she her and all that she has to offer is better than even having 7 sons. So that was a huge compliment. Verse 16, it says, "Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. And the women living there said, 'Naomi has a son.' And they named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse and the father of David." And so now Ruth is kind of out of the picture. I mean, we've jumped a long way here. We went from the agreement taking off the sandal between Boaz and Fred to now they've already gotten married and they've gotten a child. And the child is the people or the narrator is saying the child belongs to Naomi. She's the grandmother. And now we're not even talking about Ruth. But it goes on and talks about that child being Obed. And Obed is the father of Jesse, who is the father of King David, the greatest king in the nation of Israel, from whom the Messiah is going to come. And so don't miss the fact that we've just read that Ruth, a pagan woman, a Moabite woman who is the sworn enemy of the nation of Israel, is the greatest king of Israel's great grandmother. She is in direct line to the Messiah. If she's not in the picture, this doesn't happen. God brings her into the picture as a result, even of a disobedient child of God. Remember, God is my king. Elimelech disobeys God. He turns his back on his homeland, on the promised land. He goes to this pagan land of Moab. And so he's disobedient on so many levels. And then God uses that situation to use this pagan woman to restore that line that is ultimately going to lead to the Messiah. And so the writer then is going to drive home the point of just how amazing this is. And he reads off the lineage of the line of Perez. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, that's the child of Ruth and Boaz, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, the great king of Israel. And David, the greatest king of Israel, through whom the Messiah will come, Jesus. And so, although this is a great story, it's a love story, and there's so many great things about Boaz and Ruth and things that apply to us as men and women and husbands and wives and just people in general of how to treat others. This is an even greater story of another kinsman redeemer. And that kinsman redeemer is Jesus himself. The entire story of the Bible is about God redeeming his people and redeeming sinful people, people who do not deserve to be redeemed. And to redeem someone is to pay a price. So the story of Ruth and Boaz is this microcosm of the story of God redeeming all of mankind. And so understand, to be a redeemer, you have to have the legal right to redeem somebody. Boaz, although he wanted to redeem Ruth and take care of Naomi as well, he did not have a legal right to do so. There was somebody else before him who had that legal right, and they had to overcome that hurdle. So once that guy gave up Fred, once he gave up his legal right, that became the legal right of Boaz. He has to have the ability also to redeem it. He has to have the resources. He has to have the money. He has to be able to take care of them. And so we know that Boaz is a very wealthy person. He's done well for himself, so he certainly had the ability to redeem. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, you have to have the resolve. You have to have the desire. You have to want to do that. And we know that Boaz has that desire for Ruth. Um, uh, when you look at Fred, the other guy, he had the legal right. He also had the resources, more than likely, but he certainly didn't have the resolve. He had no desire to take on Ruth and all that that meant. And so when you contrast that to the larger picture of the Bible and of Christ, does Jesus have the legal right to be a redeemer for us as individuals? And I think he's certainly a relative. He's certainly in every capacity has the legal rights to do what he pleases with regards to our life. Does he have the ability? We know that he owns everything in heaven and on earth. He certainly has that ability. He's got the resources, and he has the resolve. He was willing. He didn't have to go down this path of dying on the cross, but he does so willingly. And so there's no question that he has the resolve. Even before we were born, he was willing to make that decision to do so. And so jump over to Matthew chapter 1. You'll understand that the book of Matthew, when we talked about the Gospels previously, we talked about the writers of the Gospel and how they're writing to different groups of people. Matthew is written specifically to Jewish people. And so Jewish people, that's why in Matthew you have this very rigid account of genealogy. It's because this is very important to the Israelites, maintaining pure lines, maintaining the clans and the tribes. And so where the story ends in of Ruth with the lineage, where we see, Obed, Jesse, David, you see this in Matthew's lineage as well, around verses 5, where it says Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Also, keep in mind, Rahab was a pagan woman. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, a pagan woman. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Is the product of a sinful act between David and Uriah's wife. And so if these things didn't happen, if you didn't have all the way back in Genesis 38, this overcoming this break in lineage through redeeming people, and then again in Ruth, we never get to this point where Matthew is able to connect all the dots and show the lineage all the way from the beginning of Abraham through the line of the Messiah, Jesus. And so as I kind of work through that, there's some things that kind of stand out to me. The thing that I like the most is this idea that God is completely, wholly committed to saving us. From the beginning of time, He has worked through throughout the ages to ensure that this line would get His Son to the proper place so that He could die on the cross for us, and that we ultimately would have an opportunity to choose to be part of that same family. Um, and despite man's poor decisions along the way, God is making things happen, and then man makes these dumb decisions and kind of gets us sidetracked. He has to find a way to get us back in line, and he does that time and time again. Um, the thing that stands out to me that I perhaps don't like is this question of the intensity of the rights and the resources and the resolve. So what I mean by that is that as a believer who's part of the family of God, who has been redeemed, I have an obligation as a member of the family of God to continue God's plan of redemption. And my role in that is to perpetuate the gospel, to share the gospel with people. Do I have the legal right to do that? Well, yes, I do, because I'm saved. I'm a child of God, and so I'm part of that family. So that gives me the legal right to carry on as His ambassador. Do I have the resources? Well, yes, I do, because knowing that I would be incapable of doing this as a child of God, God places the Holy Spirit within us, and so He, in essence, is the ability, the resource, or the only resource that we need to do that. So that it comes down to the question of resolve. Do I desire to do that? That is the area that I think most of us would probably struggle with, because it requires us to look at our situation and the things going on around us and to say, yes, I'm willing to do what it takes. I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm willing to pay the price to share that with somebody else. Or are we going to be like him and Boaz in that sense? Or are we going to be like Fred, where we say, you know what, I'm a child of God, and that's a good thing. So I certainly have a legal right. I do have the Holy Spirit. He lives within me. But you know what? My resolve isn't there, because if I carry on that responsibility and I share the gospel with other people, it means that, that it's going to bring more pain into my life, or it's going to cause me greater conflict, or there's going to be something I lose in my life. So it's a resolve to say, well, I'll accept Christ dying for me, and I'll accept that He put the Holy Spirit in me, but I'm just not ready to bear the additional responsibility of sharing that with other people. And so I think ultimately that's all of our challenge as followers, as disciples of Christ.